All right, so let's see. The first one we have, Jason. Do you want to speak a little bit about the question?
Yeah, so I've changed roles slightly at Google, and I'm looking a lot more into, uh, build image attestations and build materials and secure software chain things.
Okay.
So I'm just sort of deep diving on things like permissions and whatnot. And I always thought that in the Buildpack spec there was kind of two users involved, a privileged and an unprivileged one. The Buildpacks themselves ran unprivileged, but
Right.
in looking through the docs, it seems to suggest that the builder image should actually be user. Like this is the thing that the lifecycle binaries sit inside. That it should run as the unprivileged user. So it seems like the whole process is running as the unprivileged user. And I'm kind of wondering, is that right? Or is there a mistake in the example builder images? Or do you have any more info about that?
I think by default, and some of this might have shifted through, historical kind of challenges, but the intention is that we want to kind of run in the most restrictive fashion possible. And it is and so that kind of becomes the default, right? Which is the user defined that the builder image is more or less a restricted user. There's more or less an exception when it comes to running in, I believe it's the creator, where you have to run as a privileged or root user, right? And in that particular case, we're running, if I remember correctly, it's running that specifically to be able to gain access to the Docker daemon socket in that particular use case to be able to do that. That's the last recollection I have, but that's more or less what I understand it to be. Is that something different than what you're noticing?
Well, I'm just, the examples right now are suggesting that I set the user to be this CNV user ID, which means that the life cycles, I think, would run as that user, even if it's creator or exporter. I'm assuming exporter and restorer stages need access to the Docker daemon just like creator would. But it just seems like this whole process is running as the unprivileged user, which actually my more specific question is around report.toml.
Okay.
Like I feel like the lifecycle binaries should have permissions to write report.toml, I guess exporter specifically and creator by extension, but that the build pack should not, so I'm trying to figure out what the right way to set up these users are. Like I understand there might be historical stuff. I understand the docs might be out of date. So I'm trying to figure out, what is the right way to set these things up.
That's interesting. I know somebody that could really help out with this is actually Emily. I think she's like the mastermind of permissions when it comes to that aspect of it and why it's structured in the way that it is now, right? So she would have that context. I could see if she's available to jump on the call. But yeah, it's interesting that you bring up the report.toml in this though, because I'm failing to see exactly why there would be a thought of, I guess a sort of restriction on report.toml. Since the build packs themselves should be only writing to a certain area of the file system, right? And I believe that should be very separate from report.toml.
I think the default location is layers / report.toml by default, which, it then comes back to my question, what's the right way to set up permissions for, like, say, layers and platform so that, build packs have access to write things that they need to write, but they can't write into areas where they ought not to, like report.toml.
Okay, so I guess if I may ask, are you are you trying to create a builder? Is that kind of the main gist, or are you, re-implementing certain parts of the systems that we have?
I mean, we have builders today at Google. We have an
Right.
open source one. We have builders for App Engine. We have builders for Cloud Function. They all do this activity of setting the user to be this unprivileged user. I'm kind of exploring, why is it set that way? Doesn't that mean then that the unprivileged user can write and overwrite and mess with this report.toml file? And it just doesn't seem right to me. So I'm trying to figure out, like the very, very specific way that this should be set up, so that there's both a privileged user. I believe there should be two users. There should be the privileged user and an unprivileged user involved in this build.
Yeah, so I don't disagree with you on that. And I think that brings about another, if we're talking about security in general, right? I think that brings about another sort of related RFC in which certain aspects of, or certain directories, although the spec itself says that, it's not writable, by its current implementation, it is writable, right? So I think there's maybe the discrepancy of what the spec is hoping would be reality versus what the true reality of things are. And I think that might be what you're into, is that you're capable of doing it, but the spec in its idea is hoping that you shouldn't be able to, right? And it's just
right. And we have a step that happens before our creator step. I call it the shim. And it does things like chmod layers folder and chown the layers folder and whatnot. And I think actually maybe you wrote a similar thing for Tecton. And the same sort of scripting happens before, where it's like, okay, I'm going to chown all of layers. I'm going to chmod all of layers to this unprivileged user. And that's, and that's what we do too. And it works. That's great. But again, wondering if that's actually what we should be doing. Do you know what I mean?
So I see the mess, right? Like I understand the quote unquote mess. But I guess I'm still trying to piece together and understand if it's a security concern that you're coming at this from, or if something isn't working the way that you expect it to work in a current.
I think really fundamentally, if I ask my very specific question, I feel like the lifecycle binaries should be able to create a report.toml file, but the Buildpack code should not.
Right. And you're saying,
and I think today it can.
Right, because of the permissions. There's nothing on a permissions level that tells you that you can't. And yeah, I could see that. Let me point you to the RFC that I was thinking about, where it was trying to be more restrictive on the build packs. And ultimately, I don't think there was an actionable outcome at this point in time. Let me see, I know it was Sam that wrote it. Make build layers read only for subsequent build packs. I don't know if you've got, it's still open, but I don't know if you've read or heard about that one. So I just shared that. I'll put it on the doc as well.
I think that sounds interesting, but that's not really directly my concern here, but that does sound interesting.
Yeah, but I think it's related, right? It's the idea that build packs have a little bit too much, too much of a permission to do things, even though that's not really the anticipation or expectation of the spec as it currently stands.
Yeah. So this is basically a trust boundary between build packs themselves.
Yes. So in
And
this
so fair enough. Yeah.
yeah, so in this particular case, a build pack does something, and then subsequent build pack comes in and is able to essentially mutate the data that they've written because again, it's in the layers directory, right? And you're saying the report.toml is in the layers directory, and because of that, they know exactly where that is and they could do things with it.
Right. Like I believe that it's configurable. The spec doesn't say that report.toml has to be in layers that I can find. All it talks about is the format of it. And I believe I can drop it someplace else. So that's good. But then it comes back to this question of, well, is there really two users involved, right? Because if I drop it someplace else, that's still, if it's still being written by the unprivileged user, that means the Buildpacks can mess with it. So I still think there needs to be two users involved in the overall build. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
Lifecycle binaries should be able to should have access to write this report.toml. Buildpacks should not.
Yeah, I am curious what some of the other more, security savvy individuals, like I mentioned, Emily and Stephen, would think about that. But I definitely see where you're coming from. I feel like they're going to say something about, well, there's maybe a workaround, right? That we should be thinking about from some aspect of it. And they would probably know better than I in that case.
Okay. How do you think I can ask this question? Should I just do it on Slack?
Yeah, I think that would probably be the easiest, right? And I think the end goal, the simpler question, at least the way I heard it, right, is that how do I get Buildpacks to not be able to write report.toml?
Yeah, I think that's a good way to sort of enter into the question. I agree.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. I'll just, should I just drop it in general on Slack then?
Yeah, and again, I'll poke people to go look at it. It seems like we're having a little bit of an absence of maintainers today, so we just came in on the wrong day. Yeah.
No worries. Okay, cool. That's all I have. Oh, and then the other question I have is I know there was a big RFC from Stephen, I believe, about like kind of a fundamental change to the way Buildpack spec works around stacks or dropping stacks, I guess. I'm just wondering, what's state of affairs there? What's the plan?
So is it more of like the likelihood that this will actually happen? Is that the first
question?
That's
question number one.
Yeah, so it seems, I'm trying to pull it up. I don't know if I'll get the unicorn because of how many comments we have. But yeah, right now looking at the approvals, it looks like we have 3 core maintainers plus Steven, 4 core maintainers that are approving this. And we essentially just need 1 more to get this in. So it's very likely that this will happen. I think the biggest challenge is just going to be how do we migrate over to this, right? And I think that might be the part that takes us a little bit of time, but it's very likely to happen and most likely within this year. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, my next questions were about migration, cutover, and things like that. So it sounds like that's sort of still in discussions. So we don't need to dive into that today.
Yeah. Are you able to make it to the working group meetings that happened earlier in the morning?
They are really early in the morning for me, but I think that I will try to come. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I would say that those are the best for anything spec related or like the RFCs part. That's where everybody does tend to get a little bit more together. But if you give us a bit of a heads up for these sort of conversations, we can make sure that we have the right people in this meeting as well. And so that's not a big deal.
Sure. Okay, great. I will post a question on Slack.
Sounds good. All right.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.